Hello health champions, today I want to talk about vitamin D, the best ways to get it into your body and the top 10 foods to get it through diet. Coming right up. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Ironically, the first thing we have to know about vitamin D is that it's not a vitamin. Vitamin D is actually a hormone because we can make it ourselves. And a vitamin, by definition, is something that has to be obtained through the diet. Like most hormones, we need it in very, very tiny amounts. So it's measured in micrograms or international units. 1 microgram is 40 international units of vitamin D. The hallmark of a deficiency is called rickets. Rickets is a softening of bone. It's a malformation of bones. When the calcium can't get deposited because we don't have enough vitamin D, the bones get soft and crooked and misshapen. The normal way that we make vitamin D, that we don't get it through the diet, we manufacture it, is from exposure to the sun. It's called the sunshine vitamin. And we are supposed to make enough just from a little bit of sun exposure. We can also get it through the diet, and when we do, it comes in 2 forms. One is called vitamin D2, also known as ergocalciferol, and the other one is D3 called cholecalciferol. And if you notice how close this name is to cholesterol, that gives you a hint of what the building block is. We use cholesterol to manufacture cholecalciferol. So vitamin D3 is the form that humans and animals make, and vitamin D2 is the form that plants make. In either case, vitamin D is made from ultraviolet light. So when they manufacture it synthetically, they actually irradiate it. So if they make D2 from plant source, they irradiate yeast, and if they make it from an animal source, they irradiate grease from lamb's wool. But sunlight isn't all we need. We also need healthy organs. So first, the sun hits the skin makes cholecalciferol or vitamin D3, but we're not done then. The D3 has to get to the liver and be processed into calcidiol, and we're still not done because the kidney has to finish the process and turn it into calcitriol, which is the final product. So if we have a fatty liver or we have some kidney disease, then we can't complete this process and we don't get the final product of vitamin D that we actually use called calcitriol. Another thing that's good to know is that because vitamin D is fat soluble, it can be stored. Unlike vitamin C and vitamin B, which are fat soluble, they have to be replenished much more frequently. Vitamin D, we can have a store for weeks and months. We don't have to get it every day. We can build up a reservoir and then we'll be fine through the winter, for example. So why is vitamin D so important? What is it that it does? Well, it's involved with calcium metabolism. And calcium is one of the most important minerals in the body, not just for bone, but it also does 1,000 different things in the body as signaling molecules. Vitamin D helps the body absorb calcium from your digestive tract, and it also monitors how the kidneys excrete it. So it helps bring it in and it helps manage how it's excreted. It also works with calcitonin, which is the parathyroid hormone. The parathyroid hormone puts calcium in the bone and then it reduces and pulls calcium out of the bone into the bloodstream. So that's a constant exchange, and in the short term, it's much more important to have the proper level of calcium in the blood than to have it in the bone. Because the bone, that's important for years to come, so we have a stable skeleton. When we don't have the proper blood calcium levels, then we can't make it through the next few minutes. Calcium and vitamin D work together, and vitamin D manages and works together to produce proper muscle tone, and it produces the proper signaling in the nervous system, and it is an immune activator. These are the basic underlying mechanisms, and that's why vitamin D and calcium are so crucial, because these mechanisms participate in virtually everything that happens in your body. Every time they do some new research, they find more ways that vitamin D is important. So they find that low levels of vitamin D is associated with higher levels of cancer, higher levels of heart disease, higher levels of fatigue, more obesity, and more depression. And the more they look, the more they find that vitamin D is crucial for that function. So it's almost like we don't have to ask what's vitamin D involved with, but rather, is there anything that it doesn't do? Is there any function where it's not involved? And they pretty much haven't really found anything. So that's why there's so much talk recently about vitamin D. And one of the most important that is very current is the immune issues. That vitamin C and vitamin D are both incredibly important for the immune system to function properly. So what about deficiencies? Are they common? Well, a deficiency is classified as having less than 20 nanograms, that's 20 billionths of a gram, per milliliter of blood. And they found that they did a study in the US, 42% of Caucasians were deficient. That's fair-skinned people who have an easy time to make vitamin D from the sun. They're the best at making it. Hispanics have a little bit harder time of making vitamin D, and they had 69% of people were deficient, and African Americans, over 80% of people were deficient, because the darker the skin, the more pigment you have, the more it interferes with the vitamin D manufacture. So while less than 20 nanograms is deficient, a normal or sufficient level is considered 30 to 50. And some people argue that the higher the better. And they say that maybe we should be 80 to 100 nanograms, that would enhance things further. And I don't subscribe to that opinion, because even though deficient is a bad thing, that doesn't mean that more than sufficient is better. It's not like it's supposed to do something, it's just that the absence of it prevents the body from doing certain things. That's not the same thing as saying that more is always better. And in fact, with vitamin D, you can get toxicity effects. It is possible to have toxicity. You have to work at it pretty hard, but it is possible. And to get up in the 80 to 100 nanogram range is typically only possible through pretty heavy supplementation. So here's what it typically looks like if you get it in supplement form. And the recommended daily intake or daily allowance used to be 200 international units. And in 1997, they changed that, and they said that we probably need about 400 IUs. And I'm not sure why, if that was just because they discovered more people were deficient, or because people are getting less healthy and spending less time in the sun and getting less fresh air and so forth. From 1997, 400 IUs were recommended for adults, and 600 IUs were recommended for elderly, because as you get older, you use it less efficiently and you make it less efficiently. Now here's an interesting question for you, because someone took all of the fortified foods, because they can make synthetic cheap vitamins and sprinkle it in all the milk and all the orange juice and on all the cereals. Virtually every processed food out there is fortified with vitamin D. And when they added all that up, they found that the average person received about 2,400, about 4 to 6 times the recommended daily allowance from synthetic vitamin D. So how then were all these people deficient? How is it possible to get all that synthetic vitamin D and still be deficient? Well, in my opinion, I think it is because the synthetic vitamin D is not the same. When we irradiate yeast or when we irradiate grease, it can never be the same way as the original mechanism that your body manufactures it. And most of that fortification is also the D2, the ergocalciferol, because it's much cheaper to make and the body isn't really good at using that. But it's not the only factor, because it's all the other mechanisms, it's all the other pathways in the body that utilize and put things together. So any part that's not working, the less healthier we get overall, the less efficiently we're going to be using the vitamin D as well. We had a patient come in a couple of years ago and her blood work showed that she was very deficient. She was under 20. And her medical doctor gave her 50,000 IUs of synthetic vitamin D. And her levels hardly changed. They came up maybe 1 or 2 points. And then we put her on a program of whole food supplements, real food, and a very low dose of a natural vitamin D called Cataplex D. And within a few weeks, her levels were up to 58. So a small amount of something that the body could actually use was much more potent than tens of thousands of units of synthetic vitamin D. So I think it's not just the number that matters, but it's the quality and how well it fits in with the bigger picture. So let's go over the best food sources to get real, whole, natural vitamin D. And it's kind of interesting that vitamin C is only available in plant food and vitamin D is only available in animal food. There is virtually no exceptions to that rule. We'll have a couple in here, but pretty much vitamin D, being a hormone, is an animal product. So first, let's talk about butter. If we eat 100 grams, or about 3.5 ounces, just a little bit less than a stick of butter, the way they're sold in the US, then we get 60 international units of vitamin D. But are you going to eat a stick of butter? Well, if you're on keto, you might. But if you have fat phobia like a lot of people, then you're going to eat considerably less. So let's say a serving is 3 tablespoons. And that might still seem a lot to some people, but I eat 3 tablespoons quite often. I probably go through close to a stick of butter most days. Those 3 tablespoons are only going to give us about 27 international units for that serving. So it's about 9 IUs per tablespoon. So you're going to have to eat, to get the 400 IUs completely from butter, you're going to have to eat about 1.5 pounds, about 6 sticks of butter. And that would be pretty hard to pull off. And it wouldn't probably be the best and healthiest way in the long run either, even if butter is a good food. If we eat beef short ribs, it has 27 IUs per 100 grams. If a serving is 150 grams, or about 6 ounces, that would give us 41 IUs. And to get the whole 400 IUs, we'd have to eat about 1.5 kilos or 3 pounds of ribs. That's pretty hefty. So these are not reasonable. Even though there's a good little trickle of vitamin D, we're not going to be looking to eating these foods to getting the whole supply of vitamin D. Beef liver, same thing, 49. If a serving is 100, then we'd have to eat about 3 pounds, 8.8 kilos of liver. If we eat eggs, now we're getting into a reasonable range. I mean, it could be done. 100 grams, 3.5 ounces, that's about 2 eggs, has 80. If we eat 2 eggs, then if we want to get the whole 400, we have to eat about 500 grams, which is 10 eggs, 9 or 10 eggs. If we go into the plant kingdom, mushrooms are about the only thing that in the plant kingdom that makes any vitamin D. The richest source is called a chanterelle, which is very tasty, especially sauteed in butter, but it's very expensive, it's hard to come by. It has 212 IUs. A serving might be 50 grams, so we get 106. If we want the whole thing from mushrooms, from chanterelles, we have to eat about almost half a pound, and that's a pretty big pile. The other thing to keep in mind is that the plant source are going to have D2. It's going to be ergocalciferol, which is not as efficient. So in order to get the same amount, you probably have to double up or triple up on the D2. And we don't know for sure that that source is as good as the D3 that we're making ourselves. Pork spare ribs, 30% fat. So it's the fat pretty much, because vitamin D is fat soluble. It's going to be the fatty tissues that have most of the vitamin D. 88 IUs per 100 grams. 6-ounce serving is 132 IUs. And if we eat 1 pound of pork spare ribs, then you would get the 400 IUs from there alone. And you could definitely argue that that's possible. If you go into a restaurant and you get a whole rack of ribs, that's probably at least that much. But if you did that every day, then you might get tired of ribs before long. And now we're going to talk about the best items. So this is really some of the very few sources that you can reasonably get all of your vitamin D from a food source. And they're going to be fish-based for the most part. So the lean fish, not having so much fat, like cod or flounder or sole or whitefish, they'll have somewhere between 100 to 400 IUs. And if a serving is 150 grams or 6 ounces, now we're talking 150 to 600 IUs. So you could get the whole daily supply from about 100 to 400 grams. So a moderate to a very large serving depending on the fish. And by the time we get to the fatty fish, the numbers get even better. So things like salmon or mackerel or even eel, if you can get that, now we're getting up toward 1,000. So salmon would be more in the 400 range, eel would be more in the 1,000 range. If a serving's 150 grams, you could easily get your whole daily supply from one serving. So you'd only have to eat about 40 to 100 grams, about 1.5 to 3.5 ounces to get that 400 IUs. And then we get to once more mushrooms. So I don't know if you could irradiate chanterelles, but once you shine some UV light on mushrooms, they start making vitamin D. They make the ergocalciferol, the D2, and they make a lot of it. So if you put them in a solarium, if you put them on a sun tanning bed or out in the sun for 10 minutes or so, you're going to get about 1,000 IUs in those mushrooms per 100 grams. And if you eat that serving, you're going to get the full 1,000 from one serving of mushrooms. But you have to put them under UV light, either in the sun, in a strong sun, or you could do it even faster if you have some UV light. You'd only have to eat about 1.5 ounces to get that 400 IUs, but like we said, the ergocalciferol, the D2, is not as potent as the D3. So these really are the best food sources to get vitamin D. And even so, it might be hard to consume enough of these on a regular basis. It's kind of tough to get vitamin D from food only, assuming that you never get out into the sun at all. And if that's the case, then I would suggest that the last one, the first one on the list, cod liver oil, is going to be your best bet for a simple way to get all of your vitamin D on a daily basis. 3.5 ounces, 100 grams gives you 10,000 IUs, which is more than you need. So a serving being a tablespoon would give you 1,500. And to get the 400 IUs, you'd only need a little under a teaspoon. So if you take somewhere between a teaspoon and a tablespoon of cod liver oil, then you're going to get your full daily supply of vitamin D. And not only that, but you're going to get it in a form that's very absorbable, and you're going to get it together with plenty of vitamin A, and there's going to be a lot of those associated factors like A, D, E, K in there as well. So oftentimes when we talk about this, we're kind of assuming that you're going to get all your vitamin D from one source or from one food. The food is really more just a supplement. The best way still and always to get your vitamin D is from the sun. That's how humans have done it for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. But there are some limitations. If you have dark skin, the darker the skin, the harder it is for you to make vitamin D. That's why Afro-American people have more deficiencies, because even though they tolerate the sun much better, they also have to spend more time in the sun to make that vitamin D. The area of exposure. We don't show off much skin anymore. We wear clothes most of the time. We sit indoors, we work indoors, we drive in our cars, we drive from one garage to another garage, and we rarely see daylight unless we make an effort to go outside. And once you go outside, then it's the area of skin that's exposed to the sun that matters, right? So if you're only showing your face, that might only be 5 or 10% of your body's surface, and you're not going to make a whole lot of vitamin D. The angle of the sun matters. So at the equator, the sun shines pretty much straight down, and the UV radiation is pretty intense. The further you get away from the equator, the less the angle, the inclination of the sun rays. And by the time you get up to areas like where I'm from in Sweden, where you have 55, 60 degrees away from the equator, the angle is so slight that it's only in the middle of summer that you make any significant vitamin D. And then we have sunblock. In recent years, we've been made aware of the cancer-producing effects of excess sun. So then people go overboard, and now they're afraid of the sun, and they don't even want to spend even 30 seconds in the sun. And all the cosmetics and the skin lotions and everything we put on have sunblock. And that effectively prevents completely the production of vitamin D also. Now let's say that we venture outside and we try to make some vitamin D. How much can we make? How long does it take? Well, on someone like me, I'm Caucasian, I'm fair-skinned, I live in Atlanta, that's 34 degrees north of the equator. If I go outside in June or July and I'm going to make 1,000 IUs of vitamin D, I have to spend about 20 minutes outside in bright sun, about 3 times a week, and I only have to expose 20% of my skin. So that's like hands, forearms, and face. So if I still wear like a short-sleeved shirt, I can pull that off in about 20 minutes. If I take my shirt off, if I'm bare skin from the waist up, now I have about 50% of my skin exposed, and I only have to spend about 8 minutes in the sun to make 1,000 IUs. If I also wear shorts, so I have about 80% of my skin exposed, I only have to spend 5 minutes in the middle of the summer. So these times are going to go up a little bit if we're talking April or September. And depending on where you live, you got to figure this out. So I would recommend that you try to get most of your vitamin D from the sun. That is how humans have received it. That's how we have made it for as long as we have been here on the planet. So even though sun can be in excess, can be damaging, if you do it in moderation, if you don't stay out until you get sunburned, if you just get moderate exposure, then it is a healthful vitamin. It's a nutrient that your body needs. Then I suggest you also eat some real food, because it's not just about the vitamin D, it's also about the other factors. It's about the calcium, and it's about the digestion, it's about essential fatty acids. They all work together to transport and produce and interact with each other. If you eat real food and you take care of your digestion, then you're going to have the best chance of making and utilizing the vitamin D properly also. And if you feel like you are at risk that you may not be getting enough sun or you may not be getting enough through the food, if you don't eat fish on a regular basis, then my best recommendation would be a cod liver oil supplement. If you have access to some of the things we use like Cataplex D or whole food supplements, they would also be good. But cod liver oil is so easy, it's inexpensive, it's available everywhere. Just pop a couple of those and you'd be fine. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you also check out that one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.